Welcome to Charlotte Prep's podcast, Portrait in Diversity. This month, Meha Khanna and Sharina Madodi speak with Neeraj Khanna, a longtime member of the Prep community, about diversity in the South Asian diaspora, what it means to be a product of a multicultural upbringing, and what the future holds for the young and open-minded.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for coming. We're so glad to have you here today.
So, Neeraj Khanna, how nice to have you here. Tell us a little bit about your relationship to prep.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me and thinking of me. I am super excited to be here, and I'm super impressed by the wonderful initiative that all of you have taken to have conversations about things that are really important in our day and age. And so I really applaud you, you ladies, for that. So I'm excited to be here. My relationship to prep goes back 14 years, and I can't believe I said that. But I was introduced to the school before we moved to Charlotte, before the family moved to Charlotte, back in 2007. Meha was 8 weeks old at that time, and my elder one was about 3. So we came in as eager parents looking for the perfect school for our children, and happened to fall upon prep, was highly recommended, and we've been here since in one capacity or another. My wife, Seher Khanna, is working here in admissions, and she loves it. And I have also had the good fortune of being on the board here for about 6 years. And that was wonderful to see how the school operated, and to lend sort of my hand in doing that. So it was wonderful. So have a long history with the school, and we absolutely love it. It's really home for us.
That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your heritage and cultural history and influences?
Yeah, absolutely. So Meha, you know this, but I have a very complicated upbringing, and
We like complicated here. Yeah, it's really interesting, right? Like, yeah.
well, we'll see. But I have had the good fortune of living in lots of different countries, traveling a lot around the world. I'm originally from India. I was born in India, in New Delhi. In fact, I was born in Old Delhi, but grew up in New Delhi. And when I was about 4 years old, my father got a job outside of the country. He's a banker. And we moved to Paris, France, where I moved, luggage in tow with my mother, and at that time a newborn brother, to Paris. We lived there for about 5 years. And then we moved again to West Africa, again due to my father's profession. We moved to Dakar, Senegal, which is sub-Saharan Africa on the west coast. And I was there for about 5, a little less than 6 years. And then we moved again to Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, which is Ivory Coast in English. And I was there for about another 5, 6 years before I finished high school and moved to the US for undergrad, and have been here since. So, the influences have been an amalgamation of a lot of different things, Meha, and you probably experience this day in, day out, given that you're my daughter. And it's been a wonderful sort of experience to kind of learn all the different cultures, learn all the different languages and customs of these different areas of the world. So I'm kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of different things, but I have a very strong underpinning of being Indian from birth.
So you speak French?
Yes, I speak French. France, Senegal, and Côte d'Ivoire are all French-speaking countries. So I had the fortune of learning French in school, and having friends from the community. Yeah.
I think that's so interesting, because the language really opens up everything for you to really have a more genuine experience. Even I'm originally from India. I was born here and raised here, but my parents immigrated also, and we spent a lot of time traveling back and forth. And then finally, as an adult, I really did move away. I moved to India. I met my husband there, and the language, although I'm not a fluent Kannada speaker, but it really helped with work. It helped with getting around, and it just opened up so much more.
Absolutely. Language, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you can experience the culture in lots of different ways, but unless you can interface and interact with sort of the local people and really immerse yourself, you can't really immerse yourself unless you can interact with them,
Sure.
and language is a big part of that. So having spoken French, it was second nature, grew up with it, but I would not have made some of the friends that I did had I not spoken French, and interacting with the local families and the local folks, it would have been very different without that. So it totally changes the way you appreciate a culture or a country if you can in fact speak their language and make that effort and interact with them.
That's so interesting. I mean, both of you have been to like so many different places, experienced so much, and like learning different languages. I mean, I've only ever been in Charlotte my whole life, and it's been an incredible experience, but I think that's such a unique and a really cool perspective to have. Having said that, obviously you moved around a lot from like a fairly young age. So like just culturally and like just generally, I mean, you were quite young. How did that like impact you? How did you feel about that at the time? And then looking back on it, did anything change?
That's a really good question, Meha. I think, if I kind of rewind and put myself in the shoes of when my parents would tell me, okay, we're moving to such and such place, and and oftentimes a place I'd never even heard of, it was probably not the best of reactions as you would expect from a young boy. So I was probably resistant. I didn't want to leave my home. I didn't want to leave my friends at the time. But, I think at that age, you are so much more, I think children at that age are generally much more resilient and much more flexible than we give them credit for. In fact, you've moved yourself with your children, and you've probably seen that. So I think there is that initial resistance and hesitation, Meha, right? But once you're in the flow, once you move and you see, all the positives of being given the opportunity to see a new country, new culture, eat different foods, and be in a different school. I think it really, if you allow yourself to be open to that, there's so much to learn. And I think looking back, I mean, I wouldn't change a single thing about my experience.
Particularly, I think for South Asians, what that means when you're moving to all these different places where there may not be a sort of, established community for you to join. I mean, you were moving, so that is probably what, in the like 80s that you were moving?
That's right. Late 70s, 80s. Sorry, I'm dating myself here. But yes, 70s and 80s. Yep.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about that part of the experience, leaving India and taking some parts of your culture with you along the way, and what that experience is like.
I'm Indian. Both my parents are Indian. I think the Indian culture, which dates back 4,000 years, is such a foundational part of who I am, even despite having moved so much. I think I give a lot of credit to my parents to instill that stickiness to that culture and really use that as a foundation always, regardless of where we went. It's really a function of how my parents brought us up, or my brother and I up. We spoke Hindi or Punjabi at home. Going out, we always went to American schools, so all our academic aspects were in English with a very strong focus on French. French was the local language, and that was mandatory. And the minute you step outside of school or home, you're speaking with local children in the playground or in classes outside of school, and you have to learn how to speak French. So all of that influences sort of how you grow up and how you see the world. But I would say from a culture perspective, the Indian cultural foundation has been always a stagnant or a constant in my life. From food, from language, from visiting home every summer. Every summer we went back to India, and every summer we got tuitions, lessons to learn Hindi at home, which was probably which was probably the least favorite part of summer for many years. But again, It is something that we did at the time, probably did not appreciate what that meant, but as a result, I'm fluent in Hindi because of that bold step that my parents took of going to India every year and learning the language. So going from country to country, France, a very developed country with a lot of different cultures, present in Paris, which is the biggest city in France, and then going from there to sub-Saharan Africa, to Dakar, Senegal, which is a Muslim country. It's a desert outside of the city. And again, French, yes, but Wolof was the local language. So you had to pick that up a little bit to talk to the locals, to buy your vegetables and your fruits at the market. And then going from there to tropical rainforest Côte d'Ivoire, which is a very different landscape. But again, it's a Christian country, predominantly Christian. Again, very much, religion has a big part, plays a big part in culture and how people act and how they sort of go about their day-to-day life. So that was another adjustment, which just opened up lots of different types of experiences. So culturally, and culture is a very complex word. In fact, I looked it up in the dictionary before I came in here. I mean, it's just an amalgamation of so many different things, right? Religion, language, food, customs, laws. It all plays into what culture is and how culture is experienced. So all of those things were different in the countries that I lived in, but it was just a very enriching experience. Yes, challenging, because you take one learning from one country and you cannot necessarily apply it to the next, because you have to change and learn what the expectations are. But a wonderful way, again, to expand your mind and really think that there's no one right way to do anything. I mean, there's so many different ways to live your life, to experience life, and I was very lucky to have that growing up, and just that was sort of part of the DNA in terms of experiencing a whole bunch of different things in different ways.
Do you find that the host countries and the places where you're meeting new people, that they were also equally interested in exchanging with you about your sort of family culture and where you'd come from? I mean, were you able to weave that into their lives as well?
That's a great question. I mean, looking back, yes. I think India, fortunately, India does invoke certain curiosity in many people. And so, yes, it did have that. And again, I was very fortunate to have gone to schools where multiculturalism was very much a part of the fabric. So you were very much encouraged to share your heritage and your culture in projects, in holidays, holiday periods, and so on. So yeah, it was a very multicultural population. So there were handful of other Indians. There were people from Lebanon. There were people from Israel. There were people from other European countries, other African countries, handful of Americans, South. So it was everything. I mean, there was like a sort of a microcosm of the world. And we learned a lot from each other. So
really interesting what you said. I know, like what you said earlier about going like back to India. I can relate to that a tiny bit. Going back to Pakistan every other year and just seeing like, even we do a lot of traveling. So just being able to see other cultures, it definitely gives a very unique perspective on culture. And it's sort of like a personal culture that you have. So how would you think that your culture with your unique experience differs from a lot of other people?
So I think just being very cognizant of the fact that there are a lot of different cultures out there, and there's lots of different ways to experience that culture and live that culture. I think has been a very much part of my upbringing and of my worldview. So I think it's been really trying to weave in lots of different learnings I've had growing up, and I try to display that or live by that day in, day out with you guys at home, at work. I'm very, very conscious of the fact that my view is definitely not the only view. I'm very open to other views, and I invite sort of input and perspectives, you may not feel that at home, but
You definitely do.
but I try to, because I firmly believe there's no one right way, right? There's lots of different ways of doing it, and I think the more you hear, the more you bring in different perspectives, the better you are as a society, as a person, as a community.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a good lesson for someone who's going to be soon off to another big chapter, as you're joining another school, right? Soon, Meha, or
That's a really important sentiment just to have, like in many life experiences. I think that can be really, really something to always keep in mind. There's like no one right way. I love that.
working alongside others. And I mean, I think that's kind of what's so interesting, I think, from your experience, is that you've got the Asian, the European, and the African, and now also the American. I mean, you've literally hit, kind of like all the major sort of cultural, hubs in a way. And how do you think that also now influences, like, we didn't talk much about your professional life yet, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about sort of like what you're doing now, and how that's in, those different regions, and you talked about the different ways of doing things, like how that impacts the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, I'm again very fortunate to work for a very large international company. I work for a large bank, and I would say a lot of the roles that I have taken have been influenced by my international upbringing, right? I've gravitated towards a more global sort of canvas, and I've tried. It's not always happened. I mean, I've been working for a number of years. Before banking, I was in management consulting, and even there, I would say it was a similar drive to be more. I want to paint on a global canvas, right? I don't want to paint on a local at a local level. So more often than not, I've tried to use that to search for the right roles. I've done many international projects. My last role in the bank was really about seeing how we can leverage a global talent force and workforce, and use that for the benefit of our customers and stakeholders in the US.
Talking about your perspective and experiences, what do you think is the most, or one of the most important lessons that you have learned living abroad, experiencing other cultures, even just through travel, maybe not somewhere you've lived? What has that sort of taught you, and maybe like how does that give you a unique way to see the world?
That's a good question, Meha. There's so many lessons, but I think I'll keep it very simple. I think I've mentioned this, is never assume you're always right. Never assume that your way is the only way, and your way is the right way, and your way is the better way. Because if you open your mind up to other possibilities, and open your mind up to truly listen and try to learn from those around you, I think it just leads to so much better in terms of outcomes. And I think, to me, it sounds a little cliche, but really being open to other ideas, other perspectives, is a huge part of who I am, and how I try to operate professionally.
As a result of, like, my father having such an appreciation for so many different cultures, I've just grown up loving trying new things, even outside of food. I think it's just giving me an appreciation for like exploration and going out of your comfort zone and trying to explore. So I think that's been really awesome.
Well, you talked about comfort zone, and I was just curious, because I mean, I know we have cultural clash even in our own family, just because I imagine you probably also face that in your family. But I always think back to these moments when we've been in other countries, where there's just been something really truly lost in translation. I mean, where you've had a real, I was thinking about an oops moment, where you just like, ooh, I wish I could have done that differently. I wish I could have thought about that differently.
Yes, I think there are many, and when I think about that, I think we have to be very careful, because we come in as, it's human nature. We have stereotypes, right? We have such strong stereotypes, and even I'm far from perfect, and I've grown up in lots of different places, but we still develop stereotypes.
We all have an implicit unconscious bias, I think, which is
absolutely. Yeah, that's well said, Meha. That's right. And I've come from Africa. I've come to a small liberal arts school in the U.S., and yes, I have an Indian name, but I may not look typically Indian, or when I talk, I may not sound typically Indian. But I had a lot of friends from India, and one of the first things that that I experienced was, well, why are you not studying physics, or why are you not studying, why are you not thinking about doing a PhD in math or in
Right,
computer
right.
science? And I was very far from that, right? So I've had that same reaction to other cultures, other nationalities, where you tend to box people in a certain way just because of where they come from. So I've had to sort of slap myself a little bit on that and say, look, no, I mean, everybody has very different aspirations, and just because they have a certain last name or come from a certain country, they're not going to always want to do the same thing.
You mentioned about stereotypes, and unconscious bias is also such an important thing to acknowledge and recognize. That's like such an important step. And just realizing that like all people are stereotyped often, even if like we don't know it or understand it. And I think just acknowledging that is really great. Like at this point in my life, have no intention of becoming a doctor or an engineer or a lawyer. But, I mean, obviously we'll see. But yeah, like that's something where I've felt, especially growing up in the US, I felt like so many different, stereotypes and things like that. And on other people as well, like something I've noticed. And so just trying to like educate myself and educate others.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up something, Neha, that I think is really important for folks to understand, I think, and it kind of touches a little bit on the you were saying about the stereotype, I think, for South Asians of sort of like where they land up in life, right? Like, doctors and engineers and sort of like tech and I mean, and you're part of a generation, I think, Neha, that I'm quite jealous of, actually, I would say, because I grew up very much in that kind of, it's either this or that, right? And there wasn't much. I don't want to. I would never accuse my parents of not being imaginative, but I just think it's a defense mechanism where you try to hold on to the things you know because you're in a place that you don't understand so well yet, and so you do a lot to protect your kids, right? You're always that's always at the forefront of anyone's mind, and they take great risks to come here, as you said, it's a very brave thing to do. And so you kind of, try to guide them and based on what you know, which makes total sense. And I'm saying that now in my mid-adulthood with, not so much with a very calm voice, because that wasn't the case, 25 years ago when I really had to argue my way through, no, I don't want to do things like be a physician. And my parents were physicians. That's all that they knew. And so you're really, you're at a point, I think, in this century where you have so many options and the success is so much of what you make of it, right? And we had that last podcast that we did the last time with Mrs. Sauls, who was talking about environmental engineering, and really she's very passionate about social issues, and I think you're able to see where can I take that in life and do something with that. And that wasn't something that was part of a discussion in the South Asian community at all. I think for our age group, not at all. And
Not at all. I mean, the jobs that are currently being talked about didn't even exist, I don't think.
Do you feel like, and I often have this conversation with cousins of mine in India too, is just, do you feel that what are the differences that you see now in India? I mean, presumably you had chances to go back there, as an adult, even, with your kids and so on. I mean, the changes that have happened there have been very rapid in the last, 15 years. I mean, we're more purchasing power, more women in the workforce. I mean, the tech boom, all of these things have created, just all kinds of new spaces, right? So how do you, kind of what's your take on that change and the cultural shift there as well?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, my wife is from Pakistan. I'm from India. I go to India quite often for work, and I have extended family there. We visit Pakistan a lot. And you're right. I mean, over the last, I would say 20, 25 years, the pace of change has been incredible. I mean, we've gone through change in this country, just in my time in this country, but it's been much slower compared to what some of the other parts of the world are experiencing. I think a lot of it is wonderful. It spells opportunity for many people, the burgeoning middle class, the growth in the economy, the elevation of incomes per capita, education levels have been going up. There's a lot of very positive movement and momentum. I see it in my family, my cousins, and what they're experiencing, what they're doing is really, really wonderful. But I have to also say, that there's a little bit of a nostalgia in me, in that there's so many good things that the culture has that is, I think, getting a little bit overshadowed by some of this progress. Simple example, kids are not staying with their parents. The extended family system is probably more limited. Now I'm talking mostly about it is, and I'm talking only about the major cities, right? Because India is a very complicated country, and we tend to go to the cities, the burgeoning metropolises, but it's a very different story when you leave those cities and go into the rural side of India, which is a huge part of the population as well. The local languages are also sort of becoming less of a focus. So there are these small things that I feel I wish wouldn't be sort of the cost of modernization or growth. But unfortunately, they are.
So it's interesting. I wanted to ask Meha this too. Is your dad is Punjabi and he's from the northern part of India, and your mom is from Pakistan. There have been historically groups that have migrated from India very early on, and that might have been part of the British Raj era, but also just going to Africa, building businesses. That has always been traditionally something that's happened mostly with Western and Northern Indian communities. And we were a bit late in the South with, I think, these migration patterns and so on. But we carry with us very specific things from those communities. And it's something that actually, I don't know how many kids are always aware of this or not. I don't know if you're aware of that. Of like certain traditions that come from the Punjabi community, certain traditions that come from the Gujarati, community, certainly for Southerners as well. I mean, just in terms of diet, even the temples and the way they observe their religion, and there's a lot of stereotypes that also come with that too. We're an extremely high context culture in India, where you really need to know, like there's a lot of underlying, nonverbal things that are happening that shape who you are and the community that you're with. So I was just curious if you've picked up on any of that with your parents, because they're coming from two different cultures in the same region, but
Yeah, I was going to talk about that actually with the, North and South India. I think a lot of people don't realize, even with India and Pakistan, they're like, oh, but it's pretty much the same thing. The culture is the same, the food is the same. It's really not. Even with North and South India, like you can tell by, like you said, sometimes you're like, by looking at a last name, oh, they're North Indian or something like that. Yeah, I've definitely picked up on that, and I've learned a lot about the history of the different regions. My father is Indian. My mother comes from a Muslim family, and my father comes from a Hindu family, and I've been lucky enough to be able to observe all these different cultural aspects of both of these, and even just to learn about the different regions in India, all the languages. I mean, it's just such a rich place. And
funny thing, or the ironic thing is, my entire family came from what is today Pakistan, and we migrated from Lahore to Delhi because the Hindus moved from Pakistan, and Seher, your mother's family, moved from India to Pakistan. And so, before 1947, we were all one country. And when you peel, the layers off, there's a lot of similarity, right?
It's actually kind of refreshing, I think, in your case, because you're actually the product of something that's not very common. This mix of Pakistan and India, it's not very common. And it's, I think, a really great message. You're not just part of a very diverse Gen Z. You yourself are you alone are representative of something that all of us have been working towards, right? Like to bring those two countries closer together because they in fact do have so much in common.
Within the South Asian community, there's a lot of like, there are so many similarities. And I think it's so important to focus on that within that community.
For our students, and as yours is about to leave our school as well, you know, something that you'd like to, some parting thoughts for our prep community.
No, I think these kids are so smart. They are so aware. They are so they have so much at their disposal, at their fingertips. Unfortunately, but they have so much at their fingertips. I think just learn and just have an open mind and don't think that there's only one way. There's so many different ways of succeeding, of growing, of living your life. And I think traveling is a very big part of that, right? So be open to traveling, be open to experiencing new cultures, new foods, new people, new languages. And again, Prep has done a wonderful job at providing that opening for the students. So embrace that.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah, it was a real pleasure to have you here. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much for doing this. I think this is a wonderful tradition you guys have going, and thank you for having me, and keep it up.